Hold on just a second. Okay. Welcome everyone to our special program brought to you by the Lone Star Rotary E-Club of Texas. My name is Heidi Marsala and I'm the incoming president of our club. The Lone Star Rotary E-Club is just one club of 46,000 around the globe, making Rotary International the largest service organization in the world. A short description of Rotary for those who are unfamiliar. Rotarians are people of action. We help mothers in need and babies who are hungry. We provide water to the thirsty, guide societies in resolving conflict, ensure education and literacy, and aid communities in economic development. And we do all this without regard to religion, race, culture, location, or economic status. Very simply, we strive to make the world a better place, and I am so proud to be part of this organization. Rotarians strive to live their lives with strong integrity and high moral ethics. In fact, we recite our guiding principles together in each of our meetings, and I'd like to share those with you now. You're welcome to join me in what we call the four-way test of the things we think, say, or do. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? The Lone Star Rotary E-Club is so proud to present tonight's topic, Is It the Truth? How South Carolina Found Truth and Justice in the Alex Murdaugh Trial. And I'll now turn it over to my fellow Rotarian, Karen Chapman, this program's chair. Karen. You're muted. Karen, you're muted.
Thank you so much. Bear with us. Thank you, Heidi. And I just was saying thank you to the audience for taking time out of your busy schedules tonight to join us. As Heidi mentioned, the truth is so important to a Rotarian, and just as it is to our speakers tonight. Earlier this year, as some of you were, I watched the Alex Murdaugh trial unfold, and I was absolutely mesmerized. Here's a defendant on the stand, an attorney of high regard and impressive legal lineage, who's admitting he lied about some things, but then he swears he didn't lie about killing his family. Now, I was pretty sure he wasn't telling the truth, but I wasn't sure if the jury would believe it. As for integrity, ethics, and high morals, I was also really sure Alex Murdaugh was no Rotarian. When they found him guilty and the judge handed down 2 life sentences, I think America breathed a sigh of relief. Justice had been served. Now, the Murdaugh trial was extraordinarily complicated. Alex Murdaugh was quite the actor. So just how did the South Carolina Attorney General's office find the truth in this totally twisted case? I am proud to introduce to you tonight 2 men who have the answers to that question. First, the Honorable Alan Wilson is now serving his 4th term as South Carolina's Attorney General after being reelected last November. He's also served in the National Guard for more than 25 years, including a combat tour in Iraq, achieving the rank of colonel. General Wilson has a passion for fighting human trafficking, just as we Rotarians do. A report in 2019 ranked his state #1 in the nation for improving its human trafficking laws. And a report last year showed even more improvement in that fight. Honorable Wilson has led on several national issues and has sued the federal government to keep his state from becoming a plutonium dumping ground. In addition, Wilson secured the largest settlement in his state's history, more than $500 million over the federal government's refusal to remove nuclear waste from the Savannah River site. And I just found out Honorable Wilson is a Rotarian, and I'm so excited about that. Our second guest is also no stranger if you followed the Murdaugh trial like I did. Creighton Waters is the chief attorney for the state grand jury section of the South Carolina Attorney General's office. He manages the operations of the state grand jury as well as managing investigation and prosecution in state grand jury cases. Waters focuses on public corruption, white-collar crime, narcotics, gang activity, and homicides. In short, Mr. Waters is a very busy person. Creighton Waters has given a number of lectures and conducted numerous trainings on matters involving criminal law. He's a true lawyer's lawyer. In 2011, Mr. Waters received an Ernest F. Hollings Award for Excellence in State Prosecution. And in 2017, he was an International Fellow of the National Association of Attorney Generals Training and Research Institute. And I also hear he plays a really mean guitar, and his practice started about 10 minutes ago. So we'll get him out of here so he can go play that guitar. Now, although we cannot hear you, the audience's applause tonight, please theoretically put your hands together for Attorney General Alan Wilson and Lead Prosecutor Creighton Waters.
Thank you so much, Karen and Heidi and Bobby and everyone who helped facilitate this event. It is an honor to talk to my fellow Rotarians from another state. A couple of housekeeping matters before I jump into this. My wife and kids are upstairs, and I don't know that my wife knows that I'm doing this Rotary Zoom right now from our basement. So there's absolutely a chance you will hear people yelling down to me during the course of this presentation. You might even hear dogs barking, cats meowing, and a brother and sister fighting. So I apologize for that ahead of time. Also, Creighton and I have done a number of talks together on live TV, on national TV to groups, but we have not done this via Zoom, and I'm using a PowerPoint that he has not seen. So if it seems a little disjointed, it's because he and I are literally trying to figure this out on the fly, but we wanted to be able to present to you. And I want to give a shout out to Creighton, because I think I sprung it on him yesterday that I was going to be doing this presentation to all of you. And I said, Creighton, would you like to join us? I'm sure they would want to hear from you as well as the chief prosecutor on the case. And without skipping a beat, he said, General, I'd be delighted to. And so he is. Creighton is in a band. It's grown in prominence here in South Carolina. So if y'all looking to book a band, a rock band, Creighton is what lead guitarist. Creighton, are you bass? Or are you? Yep, you're on mute, by the way. So you may want to unmute Creighton in case I pitch to you.
All right. Yeah. Hey, everybody, lead guitar, Joe.
Lead guitar. Thank you, Creighton. But anyway. So I'm gonna one last thing that I wanted to say is that you know, as it was mentioned earlier, this case is still ongoing, and so there might be things we can't talk about, and we might skip over, and we may not comment. Please don't read into that as that we're affirming something or denying something. Don't read into it. It's just that we're trying to be careful. This is being recorded, and we have a code of ethics that we have to uphold. But with that being said, I'm going to see if I can share the screen of the PowerPoint that will help us launch into this. Now, while I'm sharing, all right, there we go. Can y'all see that? Give me a thumbs up for those that I can see. All right, good. So let me go ahead and start by saying this. I have been Attorney General for 12 years, and I've been in some very high-profile cases, criminal cases, national cases involving states and the federal government. They talked about this lawsuit on the plutonium dumping grounds, lots of big cases, but I don't think I've ever been involved in a case in my life that has captured the attention of a nation, or in some ways, you know, I had friends around the world that were texting me during the trial saying, we're watching you from Australia or from Sweden or from wherever they were. So it was just really amazing. We never dreamed that it would be this way. But I'm going to go ahead and start with, let's see if this will toggle. It's not toggling. How do we, hold on. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and give you, and I'm going to invite Creighton to jump in here in just a second. But, you know, I'm a data guy. I love data. I love looking at numbers, just because numbers can tell an entire story. We will get into the actual meat of the case. We will talk about the story, how it came to us, what was going on behind the scenes, what life was like in the courtroom. But let me give you a quick picture. So the case began on January 25th and lasted in at least the state's case, just our portion of the case went till February 17th. We had 75 witnesses, 508 exhibits, 7 lawyers from the state with 5 support staff, and we formally rested on February 17th. The defense, their case began on February 21st and lasted through the 7th, so just a little over a week. They had 16 witnesses, 113 exhibits. They had 4 lawyers and 3 support staff. Of course, if you look at the total of the entirety of the case, the jury selection lasted 3 days. The state's case was 17, 5 for the defense, and we had 2.5 days for closing arguments. and jury deliberations lasted about 3 hours. So that was a total of 29 days, and those are business days. That doesn't account for a holiday and weekends. So it was really a 6-week-long trial. Mr. Murdaugh was found guilty on all 4 counts on March the 2nd, and he was sentenced to 2 life sentences the very next day. You look at what the state grand jury, there were a total of 19 indictments involving 99 charges in 6 different jurisdictions. And you can see the names of the counties down there, and there were a total of 16 victims. The total amount of money that Mr. Murdaugh stole from that indicted conduct, of which, by the way, still remain allegations, and he is entitled to the presumption of innocence until he pleads guilty in a court of law or is convicted in a court of law. I wanted to put that disclaimer out there. But nearly $9 million were allegedly stolen by Mr. Murdaugh. And of course, this conduct goes back the better part of a decade. So the murders, I kind of like to tell people that people think this is a murder trial or a story about murder, but it's really a financial case with a murder component, because everything built up with this gathering storm that led to the ultimate deaths of his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul. When you look at the types of charges, he had 32 counts for breach of trust, 14 of money laundering, 21 violations for computer crimes, 2 forgeries. He had 11 charges for obtaining signature by false property by false pretenses, 3 false statements or misrepresentations, 6 criminal conspiracies. He had a manufacturing, distribution, and possession of narcotic for Schedule 2, 9 charges for willful attempt to evade taxes. He had there were 7 total. Let me back up. Those were just the grand jury charges. The county there was a whole nother grand jury at the county, and that there were 7 indictments involving 7 charges in 2 jurisdictions. The murders were in Colleton, and then, of course, there were the famous side of the road charges on Salkehatchie Road, which we'll talk about momentarily. So you're all in Texas. You're probably not familiar with our state, and so we're going to be talking about a number of counties, and I wanted you to know where everything is. Can y'all see my cursor? You can. So this right here is what's called the 14th Judicial Circuit. There are 5 counties in that circuit: Allendale, Hampton, Jasper, Beaufort, and Colleton. The trial occurred in Colleton County. I-95, if you ever drive through our beautiful state, I-95 is really the backbone right here along the seaboard. And it goes right off the exit in Colleton County is where the courthouse was. Mr. Murdaugh, obviously, Hampton County is where his law practice was and where most of his family lived. And of course, I'm going to move on. So as we're talking about this, think of these Hampton and Colleton are where a lot of these charges occurred. Now, the notable timeline, and Creighton can go into this, and when Creighton did a masterful job of framing the issue for the jurors, but you have to, in order to understand what happened in 2019 with the boat case that involved the tragic death of Mallory Beach and the murders in June of 2021, you got to go back 113 years to really understand what this family was about. In 1910, the law firm of Peters, Murdaugh, Parker, Ellsworth, and Dietrich, we'll call it PMPED, was founded. 10 years later, Randolph Murdaugh, the first Murdaugh, was elected as the 14th Circuit Solicitor. And remember, the 14th Circuit is all of these counties. That is the chief prosecutor or the district attorney for that circuit. He served for 20 years into 1940 when he was tragically killed in an automobile accident. His son, who was Alec Murdaugh's grandfather, was a guy named Buster Murdaugh. He becomes solicitor, and he served nearly half a century, all the way up to 1987, when his son, Randy Murdaugh, becomes solicitor. And Randy served all the way up until 2006, just shy of 20 years. So that is basically 80 years in that circuit where someone with the last name of Murdaugh was the most powerful elected official in that community. And not to mention a very powerful law firm, a very prominent law firm. And so you have what's kind of you have a very powerful family with very powerful positions and a history and a legacy that backs them up by more than a century. So a notable timeline. A lot of people have talked about a lot of things that happened in the years leading up to the murders. And I don't mention these because I believe they're in any way connected, but these just happen to be the cases that people have been following in all the documentaries and the stories. There was obviously the death of Stephen Smith, a young man who was found in 2015, found dead on the road. There was the 2018 death of housekeeper Gloria Satterfield, who died from a trip and fall at Moselle. That was on the steps there at the home of the Murdaugh family. In 2019, in February of 2019, to be more specific, Paul Murdaugh was involved in a boat crash that resulted, as I said, in the death of Mallory Beach. He and a number of his friends were in a boat. He was believed to be the one behind the wheel. There was lots of alcohol involved, and of course, it involved in that tragic death. And that will play a big role in our murder trial, and you'll understand how in a minute why. And then, of course, 2.5 years later, 2 years and 4 months later, was the death of the murders rather of Paul and Maggie at the Moselle family home. So they were murdered on June the 7th. On August the 11th, at the front end of the summer, they are murdered. On the back end of the summer, the State Law Enforcement Division, that's what SLED stands for, they confront Alex in a final interview they actually determined that they believe that he is the murderer based on evidence that was discovered excuse me, let me back up. They did not know that he was the suspect. They believed that he was possibly a suspect in the murder. They were not able to confirm that until probably 8 or 9 months later. But they did confront him, told him that you were a primary suspect. At that point, Solicitor Duffy Stone, who was the deputy solicitor in 2006 and became solicitor when Randy Murdaugh retired, he was the first person in 86 years not named Murdaugh to be a solicitor. He sends the case to my office. We already had the boat case from 2.5 years earlier, and the Solicitor Stone, who was the DA down there, decided to send it to us. On September the 3rd, Alec resigns from his law firm. The very next day, he calls 911, claiming that he had been shot in the head on Old Salkehatchie Road by an unknown assailant. And I will let Creighton talk more about that in just a moment. And then, of course, on September 14th, he asserts that that Alec Murdaugh hired Eddie Smith to kill him, and that's what he tells people. So we'll go ahead and move to the next screen. Okay, I'm going to go through these next couple slides. Basically, this is a lot of grand jury indictments. You've already heard that, but in November of 2021, he's indicted in Hampton for those charges right there at the bottom. These are the charges. Creighton, why don't I let you talk about that for a minute?
Well, sure. So as the general said, and everybody, thank you for having me. And I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And again, it's been, quite a ride as we go through this, as a young lawyer and a young prosecutor, and I've been a prosecutor my entire career, except for doing a judicial clerkship, and really have had great opportunities in the AG's office, had the opportunity to try or orally argue cases in every level of state and federal court. But like the general said, all the crazy and sometimes we do cases that just seem like the biggest thing ever, and all of them pale in comparison, obviously, to what this case became. But as the general said, I think I was home. It was 7 a.m. On June the 7th, or excuse me, June the 8th, when I got a call from a SLED agent. He said, "Are you sitting down?" I said, "Well, I'm laying down." And he said, "Well, Paul's been shot." And I said, "Oh my goodness." And then he said, "Maggie's been shot too." And obviously we knew something was crazy there. But the way our system works, as the general was describing, is that the Attorney General Wilson is a constitutional office that has supervisory authority over all solicitors. However, the state is divided into 16 judicial circuits that have multiple counties within them, and each one of those has an elected official who serves as the solicitor or the chief district attorney, or DA. We call them solicitors in South Carolina. And so generally, though, those solicitors run the normal caseload, and they do a great job of really being able to keep the everyday just glut of cases, of criminal cases, and address those. But the Attorney General's office, our role is to step in many instances, and sometimes whether there's a conflict or whether it's a particularly complex matter. And that's where the state grand jury comes in, which is a partnership of Attorney General Wilson under the statute, the Attorney General's office, and SLED, our state police. And that's what I'm fortunate enough to lead. And that's really kind of our stock and trade is to have the ability to do deep dives. The state grand jury operates a lot differently than the county grand jury. We engage in very detailed investigations that can sometimes take years. We present witnesses before the grand jury. We charge the jurors on the law and things like that.
Let me
Yes, sir.
interject real quick. Heidi, what time do we need to wrap this up by? Because I want to make sure that we stay on, because I know that y'all have a hard stop.
You want to, I thought,
What's that? What time do you need us to?
Karen, you're muted.
Oh, Karen's muted. I'm sorry, Karen. I apologize.
No, that's okay. You know, I was going to say by 10 or 15 after 7. This is so fascinating. We are recording it.
All right, when you say 7, because
7
right now I have it.
That's
I'm
8
an hour.
for us.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's
So
7:23 here.
Yeah, no, keep going. Let's just keep going. And let's wrap up your talks by 9 o'clock and
You mean 8 o'clock?
8
Okay.
o'clock. So confused, sorry. So just keep going.
Hey, Creighton, let's skim the surface, just give them the meat of what happened with around this, and then I'll go to the next slide and then we can reserve the balance of time for questions. That way we don't get into all the legal stuff.
Absolutely. I just wanted to explain the difference between the state grand jury and the county grand jury, which is a much different procedure. And of course, we did not receive the charges. General Wilson did not receive the charges from Duffy Stone until August, a couple of months later. And then it was a couple of weeks after that that the general called me up and we got involved. And so what happened is that it was not long after that the side of the road happened. And immediately our conclusion was there's something obviously fishy here. There's something that we believe relates back or could relate back to the murders themselves. It was announced then that Alec had allegedly stolen money from his law firm. And so immediately we began a whirlwind investigation into his activities with the law firm. But the first thing we did is charge these county grand jury charges for the side of the road. And that again was he had called police from the side of the road. It was literally after he had been confronted by his law firm. He had been confronted by his best friend, Chris Wilson, for stealing money from Chris. And within a couple of hours, as was proves to be the case with Alec Murdaugh, is that whenever there's true accountability that he's facing in his life, all of a sudden something happens and he's a victim and everybody ran to his aid. That's what happened here. But ultimately that allegedly unraveled, and that's led to these charges. And Jen will go on to the next slide. If you would.
And Creighton, I'm gonna skim through these. We don't need to go through them, but what I'm showing you is November 2021, we indicted him again on these financial crimes in those counties, and these are the victims. You mentioned Wilson, which is his best friend, and obviously that you've heard about Satterfield, and we'll talk about that in a minute. In December 2021, we indicted him again on a number of indictments. With all of those victims involving that amount of money. Again, all of a sudden, the financial crimes start rolling out. We indicted him again in January 2022. In March of 2022, more financial crimes, superseding indictments. But this, I'll let Creighton go into this in just a minute, but I'm going to get through all of the boring stuff and get to what y'all want to hear about. But again, as you can see, over a period of 6 or 7 months, 99 charges are just rolling out. We end up in June of 22. Y'all have heard of Cousin Eddie. That was his dealer for his pills. Obviously, he is charged. And then moving on, I'm just trying to get through all of this. In July of 2022, we'll start here. So it's been 13 months since the murders occurred. And it was here that Creighton and I sat down with the state law enforcement division, and Creighton and his team did a fantastic job of basically through the forensic evidence on the cell phones of Paul and Maggie and Alec, and on the telemetry and the GPS on his SUV, which is a late model SUV. It had all that electronics in it. They were able to map out every single thing that they were doing that night. And then, interesting enough, Alec had been maintaining from the night of the murders, from the moment that law enforcement showed up, all the way up until this point, and honestly up until the trial, that night, Paul and Maggie, who were neither of them were living full time at Moselle, Alec had maintained that they were that they came over to have dinner with him, and that he went and took a nap, and they went down to the kennels, which you'll see a map of an aerial view of the property in just a moment. And he walked, I think the kennels, Creighton, correct me if I'm wrong, were about 12 or 1,300 feet away, and that he went to sleep, woke up, and decided to go see his mother, who had dementia and lived about 20 minutes away. And when he came back from that trip to his mother's is when he discovered their bodies. What we found out was he, you know, Paul was having a conversation with a young man named Rogan, who was one of his good friends whose dog they were keeping at the kennels. And Rogan said, I thought I heard Alec's voice in the background, but, you know, couldn't be certain. And so Alec basically, it was kind of like a he said, he must be mistaken. Well, it was either in March or April. I think it was March of 2022, you know, nearly 8 months after the murders, that the folks that were trying to look at the Paul's phone were able to put in they decided, someone said, hey, let's put in his birthday and the code, and the phone opened up. And they were able to find a video. It's that famous video, for those of you that follow the trial, of Paul taking a last second video of the dog's tail that he and Rogan were talking about. In the background, you hear Alec's voice with Maggie, and that was literally taken 4 minutes before they were murdered. So that is what occurred. That is when we decided to indict him for the murders. And then, of course, more financial crimes followed in August of 2022, and again in December 2022. And then, of course, here we get to the beginning of this year. The trial was set up, and we began it in late January. And Creighton, I'll let you go into the gathering storm. This is your slide, and you can take it from here.
Yeah, so a lot of these slides did come from the closing argument that we gave at the trial. And, you know, the whole concept of the gathering storm, as we got to know more and more about Alec and looked at this particular case, what we saw was the person in an extremely unique situation, but we saw all kinds of factors for a person who had long lived at the pinnacle of this community. They were all sort of converging together, and they all were converging together on June the 7th, and they were threatening to undermine all of these factors that he had. I wrote actually that gathering storm concept as we understood more and more about Alec a year prior. And in fact, it presented it, as the general said, in July, when we were deciding whether or not to go ahead and indict the murders. And of course, it was just fortuitous that the day, not only that, I think the day that we did the opening, but also the day of the closing, that there were actually storms outside. So as much as I like to think I could summon the weather, that was purely a coincidence. Anyway, we look at this family legacy, and the general went through that timeline. We're talking about individuals who in this county, in this judicial system, in local politics, occupied a singular position of prominence and authority, like really nothing else in the state. And this, as the evidence showed that we put in, was extremely important to Alec, and it was threatened to be unraveled by all of this. The other thing, as we looked at, was that Alec, for over a decade, had been not only making millions of dollars, but also borrowing millions of dollars, but also allegedly stealing millions of dollars. And he was on an exhausting course of trying to stay ahead of his crippling debt. And so ultimately he started to steal. And General, you can go to the next slide. And as we see this, he stole in a number of ways. The main thing about that's important to know is that Alec doesn't get paid his big money except once a year, and that's at the very end of the year. And as we see the particular, as we move into June of 2021, he's out of money by the early part of the year. He actually allegedly steals $792,000 of fees, diverts those fees from the firm, and those are spent by May. And so he's running out of options as we move to June, and he's being confronted about that, and he's not going to see any new money until later. General, we can go over to the next slide. So ultimately, again, he had a very lucrative practice, but he kind of got a little upside down with the recession in 2008. And that ultimately led to what we call this constant exhausting hamster wheel, where he's every week every week having to beg, borrow, or steal to stay one step ahead of the house of cards collapsing. And then the second the house of cards collapses, if people look behind the curtain, they're going to realize who this man is. And he's going to ultimately face, as we see now, 99. It was 99 when these slides are done, but it's now 101 state financial crimes. Go on to the next one, if you would, General. So again, he had these big cases: UPS Badger, Michelin Pinckney, Dion Martin, and all of his partners thought that had straightened out his financial problems, and they did. He had massive, sometimes seven-figure recovery legal fees from those recoveries. But as we ultimately discovered and allege, he also was stealing, in some cases, seven figures from those recoveries as well from these particular victims. His fees were huge, but it just was not enough money for Alec. And again, as things move towards June, you can really see that the center cannot hold. Things are falling apart. He's out of options, and it's really kind of an amazing thing as you watch it deteriorate. Go on to the next one, if you would. All right, so he ultimately stole 4 different ways, allegedly, to keep this hamster wheel going. The first way was he would have his banker friend, who's also been indicted, Russell Lafitte, and allegedly would have him appointed as conservator for various cases. He would get trust account checks made out in those cases to Palmetto State Bank, and then he would give those to Russell Lafitte, who would then convert those to wherever Alec needed the money to go. And Russell, we allege, had a real interest in doing this, because Alec was not only doing that, he was paying him large fees to essentially do nothing in these conservatorships. Russell was also borrowing money at extremely low interest rates from these conservatorships. But Russell, ultimately, we allege, Alec had been so much into hock to the bank that essentially Russell was in hock to Alec. But anyway, that stopped around 2015. If we go on to the next slide. And this was the next one, the next set of allegations. And this was fake Forge. And so there was a company, a legitimate company named Forge, that often was involved in consulting when there were big settlements to help the plaintiffs manage their money. And so it was a name everyone was familiar with. And so Alec went down to a large national bank and had them create an account of Richard Alexander Murdaugh doing business as Forge. And then again, as it was with the prior instances, he essentially would fast talk clients through the paperwork. He'd fast talk his own staff. In most instances, he's still handing these clients very large checks for a whole lot of money, life-changing money. And so they've kind of got stars in their eyes, and they're not seeing that a sleight of hand is going on. But he would get those trust accounts made out to Forge, and the staff would believe, or the clients would believe, that that was going to the legitimate entity. But reality was he was just depositing those into an account he controlled, and then immediately transferring those to personal accounts and converting them. And millions of dollars was stolen in that way, allegedly. Finally, also, he would create fake business expenses, and lawyers may know that as living out of the file, where you essentially are running your card for various personal expenses and billing those to the client as if they are legitimate business expenses related to the case. And then the last one, General, if you flick it, he stole from his own friends and partners. And I'll tell this story very, very quickly.
This is actually my favorite, because it just shows what he's willing to do.
So
we're great on time, by the way. We're great on time.
All right.
Okay.
Time.
So very quickly, I'll tell the story. But anyway, the partners, as I said before, the partners got paid out at the end of the year, and they would zero the books. So it was common for partners, they didn't have to, and Alec pretty much never did, to loan money to the firm for a couple of months until new money came in to support operating expenses. And then they would pay these loans back. Well, the firm accidentally wrote a check meant for Alec's brother, Randy, and gave it to Alec. And Alec knows full well it's a check for $121,000 and change. He knows full well that he didn't, that was not meant for him. But instead of saying, wait a minute, I'm not supposed to get this check, he takes it. He waits a day. He goes down to payroll or to the bookkeeping and says, hey, I lost that check for $121,000. Can you cut me another one? And they trusted him, and they cut him another check. He takes that second check and he cashes it. So that's the first 121 he stole. And then he waits a number of months, keeps that other check in the desk drawer, and then a number of months later pulls that check out and cashes it too. So that's how you erroneously get a check and then steal the same money twice. So that just shows you, allegedly what this guy would go through.
So he stole from his own brother, not once, but twice, using the same check. And that just goes to show what kind of guy he is.
And so anyways, very charismatic. And again, the word you keep hearing over and over with this guy is trust. One of the things that I said in closing, one of the things I said in sentencing is that this man was very well known, very gregarious, the kind of person that never met a stranger. But the reality is that no one, even his closest friends and family, no one who knew this man knew who he really was. And obviously that's very chilling. But as we get to the boat case, that's where things really start to unravel. The Satterfield case had happened prior to that, and his insurance company had canceled them. Then the boat case happened, and his son is facing significant criminal liability, which threatens to unravel that legacy, which is so important to him. But more importantly, he's facing civil liability, where he's sued personally for issues like negligent entrustment, for essentially letting his son have this boat, be drinking when he was known to have drinking issues. And so it started some very aggressive litigation that was threatening to look behind the curtain, look at Alex's finances, which would ultimately expose him to be the crook that he allegedly is. And all of these, again, are converging on June of 2021. And generally, you can go to the next slide, and hence the gathering storm thing. Again, he's got the boat case. The attorney in the boat case is taking a very aggressive approach to this. He is telling Alec, and this is Alec's business. This is exactly the kind of law that Alec practiced. So he understands these issues very well. But the attorney, Mark Tinsley, is telling Alec, you're going to have to personally write a check, because Mark believes, like everyone does, that Alec has a huge amount of money and doesn't realize that he's broke. Eventually, the defense tells Mark Tinsley Alec doesn't have any money. And Alec is like, Mark Tinsley is like, that's bull. That's bull malarkey. I don't believe that. Show me his books and prove to me that he has no money. Obviously, Alec can't do that. But very interestingly, there was a hearing scheduled for June the 10th, just a few days later, in the boat case, where one of the issues was going to be the plaintiff's request in the boat case. And again, a young lady by the name of Mallory Beach died as a result of that boating accident in which Paul was allegedly driving. And so there was a hearing where the attorneys for Mallory Beach were seeking to have the court order Alec to turn over his accounts so that they could look at the accounts. And obviously that would be devastating. Alec cannot have that happen.
So, and one of the things that Creighton did a great job in the trial is that on June the 10th, there was going to be a hearing where the Mallory Beach's family that hired this attorney to sue him for her wrongful death. They were going to start in motion. They were going to start in motion a series of things that would have the court require Alec to turn over and open up all his books. And Alec has for years has been able to manage lies. He's been able to be one step ahead of people. And if this hearing occurs, then the dominoes will start falling right there, and he won't be able to stop them. At least that was the case. That was the theory of our case. So, Creighton, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, very quickly. So again, Alec does have, he's pretty much out of money at the beginning of the year. He does have this one case that he is handling with his best friend, Chris Wilson. They get a large recovery, which means $792,000 in fees for Alec. All those fees are supposed to go to the firm, and that means Alec, again, won't get a portion of them until the end of the year, as I explained before, because that's when they pay out. But he needs that money now. So he has Chris Wilson divert those fees to him. That's $792,000. And just to get an idea of what I was talking about with how fast Alec was burning through money, that money is gone by May. And again, he doesn't have any options at that point. And sort of the Hannibal is at the gate, and he's already burned through his really big case that he brought in at the beginning of the year.
We already went over this.
Talking about before, the attorneys in the boat case are really pressuring Alec for either money or information. And again, the hearing on that is delayed to June 10th. So it is right around the corner. And again, they're seeking to look at Alec's accounts. Additionally, the Satterfield case, he had already stolen, allegedly, this money a couple years before. The Satterfield was his longtime housekeeper, and he had told the sons of Mrs. Satterfield he would take care of them. But he had allegedly stolen the money. But some media coverage had come out that the case had been settled, and so they're making inquiries. He allegedly stole millions of dollars from the Satterfields. All the money had been gone. He had not paid them a dime, allegedly. And so at the same time where he's out of money, he's already burned through his big recovery, and people are asking questions. The Satterfield boys are starting to ask questions like, we were hearing that this case settled. And obviously he doesn't have any money to pay them back and try to hide the ball, and much less millions of dollars. Keep going if you would, General. So as we move to June the 7th, Alec's own paralegal gets suspicious because she has not received the fees from that case with Chris Wilson. She believes, oh, Alec just probably, lost it or something like that. She calls Chris Wilson's office and can't get a straight answer. She goes and tells the firm CFO, who tells the partner. They try to get a straight answer from Chris Wilson's office as to where the fees are. They can't. And so on the morning of June the 7th, the day Paul and Maggie were murdered, the CFO goes in the office and says, Alec, I have reason to believe that you took those fees. I need an answer right now. You need to show me that you did not. And Alec says he gets a phone call about his father's worsening condition. Again, the patriarch of this family legacy that was so important to him, and manages to divert the conversation. But there was a confrontation that morning where the CFO was demanding an answer that Alec couldn't give. And if they start to look, they're going to quickly uncover what all he's been doing. And in fact, that's what happens a few months later in September.
We also, we went back and looked at all the text messages over the course of that day between Alec and Maggie and Paul. And you can tell from the text messages that, Alec in his narration to law enforcement doesn't really understand why they're coming over there, other than that they might be worried about him. But in the text threads, you can see that Maggie is texting her housekeeper saying, Alex wants me to come over to the house tonight, because she was staying at another house that they had at Edisto. So he wanted, Paul was living in Columbia, he's in school. Maggie's living at Edisto, about an hour away. And he's wanting both of them to be there for dinner. And we learned that from the text threads.
Yeah, that's correct. He told police that he didn't know why Maggie came home that night. And multiple sources of evidence showed that he insisted that she come home that night.
And I think Creighton, you covered a lot of this stuff already.
Yep. Just we got the storm arriving on June 7th. People are demanding answers that Alec cannot give. And the second somebody actually goes and looks, they're going to uncover him, and he's going to face hundreds of years in prison once that happens. So here's the thing about Alec. Again, what our argument to the jury was as we looked at all of this. And it seems inconceivable to the normal mind that somebody could be motivated in this to do such terrible things, to a wife, but even more so to a son. But unfortunately, it goes on a whole lot. And there's a term for it in criminology. It's called the family annihilator. Typically, it's in the United States, it's in the South. It's a white male in their 50s, highly successful, facing financial ruin and family breakup. And but a lot of those factors, we identified obviously in this particular case. But here's the thing about it is that Alec knew that he was going to, because Mark Tinsley told him this, and this is also his business, that he was going to lose the boat case big if he went to trial. Because at the time, Mallory Beach was this beautiful young woman on the cusp of her life who had been tragically killed in this boating accident. And, Paul Murdaugh, there was, evidence of that the adults had tolerated his drinking, that they had encouraged his drinking, that there was drinking in front of the adults, that there were prior instances, and that Alec continued to let him use this boat and to not supervise him in any manner. So Alec had become a very unsympathetic figure. Paul was an unsympathetic figure. But of course, after this crime happened, and this is something only Alec would uniquely understand, the sympathies of the case changed. And immediately Alec was a victim. Nobody's concerned anymore about the money. The boat case hearing gets canceled. Nobody's thinking about the boat case. Nobody's thinking about where these fees are. And of course, Mark Tinsley actually testified that he called his client or he made the determination that this changes the numbers. I can't really take a hard line anymore because now Paul is this tragically murdered kid and Alec is the grieving father who lost his family. It changes everything. And so the net reality of this is that it worked. All the things that were the things were at Alec's gate that threatened to expose him for who he was immediately went away. He became the victim. The community poured its heart out to him in a true Southern fashion, and all of these concerns went away. And as we'll see, one of the first things he immediately did was go to his banker friend, and who gave him an off the books loan. First of all, let him run up a negative $347,000 overdraft in his checking account. I said that right. $347,000 negative. Now, I will say the bank, yeah, I will say there it is. I will say the bank charged him a $5 overdraft fee for that negative $347,000 overdraft. But we can see that. Yeah, we can see that chart there. You can see Alec's financial picture on the day of the murders. He had about 60 liquid and debts that, he had maxed out $1 million line of credit, maxed out 6-figure credit cards. He was really out of money. But one of the thing that he did in the wake of the murders, though, was get an off the books loan. It wasn't even fully filled out, and the banker loaned him the money, which first of all covered that overdraft, and then allowed him, along with some money that he borrowed from a law partner, to send money to Chris Wilson, so that Chris Wilson could tell the law firm, oh, wait a minute, no, I've had those fees all along. And of course, that stopped that inquiry. So his first efforts are to cover up these financial deeds in the wake of what the time of this outpouring of sympathy gave him. And so it's very telling, I think, when you look at his activities in the wake of these crimes. The other thing is, of course, is that Alec had an opiate addiction. He was purchasing a large amount of opiate pills, nothing like we argued to the jury that he claimed that he did, because it's just simply not survivable. No one can take 100 pills a day. I think there's no doubt that he had an opiate addiction. And I think that we put in evidence that Paul had discovered some pills and said, we have to talk about this. We put in some text of that weekend where it's inferential from the text that Alec doesn't have any pills and that he's suffering from withdrawals. And Maggie is talking to him about that because they're at the baseball game. But that was another part of the gathering storm that, we had evidence that Paul and Maggie had uncovered that he was back on the pills, and they were, pressuring him on that as well. One thing about this is that he could not go off to rehab, because like any alleged embezzler, the second they're not there to keep that hamster wheel going, it immediately falls apart and people uncover things. And he knows that. But that's just another aspect of things. So anyway, we can keep on going.
I'm going to skip past all this just to keep it moving.
Yep. And we'll get there. So anyway, that's kind of the setup as we get to the day of. And then, of course, as we looked at the day of, ultimately the timeline, as the general mentioned before, and he'll talk more about this in a second, the timeline is really what really put it all together, as we ultimately recovered that kennel video and put it in the context of the timeline. Ultimately, we had Alec at the scene of the crime with the victims just moments before they died, and he had been lying about it the whole time. The first time he ever told his story at trial that, okay, wait a minute, I was down there, but here's my explanation now, was literally when he got on the stand, some 20 some odd days into the trial. But General, I'll let you pick it up from here if you want. Yeah,
real quick. So everyone hears of Moselle. This is the address up here. This road right here, it's in Hampton County, and this is Moselle Road, and this is the house where the family lives. And then of course go down here, and then these right here are the kennels right there in the shadow. You can barely see it. And as the crow flies, Creighton, I think they said 1,400 feet as in a straight line walk. Wasn't that what it was?
Yeah, it's not a long distance at all.
But 1,400 feet is a substantial distance. It's not like just across the yard. It's across the field. And that'll be important in just a moment. And so this right here is where the murders occur, between this red roof and this kennel. And of course, Alec is claiming he's up here at the time of the murders. Let me click forward.
And just real quick, John, before you go, what's important also, if you could back up one very quickly, is that down at the bottom is the main residence, and you can see the driveway going out to the main road. But up at the kennels, it's kind of hard to see, but there's another driveway that goes out to the road right there. So it's just as easy to go out the kennels as it is to go out at the main house. And in fact, the kennel driveway used to be the main driveway until they built the other driveway. And that becomes relevant later, because Alec is claiming he's making all these calls to Maggie, but for some reason he doesn't just go down to the kennels where he supposedly just was. But go ahead, General.
And by the way, you see you'll see kind of like a linear, this used to be a airfield back in the day, and they used to run drugs, not the Murdaughs, but previous owners. And of course, you can see that's the airfield right there that I was just pointing to. Here, here's the kennel, and this is with a drone video. But here's the kennel. That, if you can see my cursor, that's the door where Paul is found, and you'll see that in a minute. This is the house from across the field. Maggie's body is found right about here, right there next to another doghouse. And of course, I'm gonna come back to that. This is actually the day that the jury goes and visits the crime scene. And so Creighton was getting ready for closing arguments. So I went with the defense attorneys and we followed the judge and the jury out there. And of course, here's the kennels that I was pointing to in the upper left corner. And you can see them, and there's the doorway. Paul's body was literally right outside that door. And Maggie's is right over here to the, actually, let me go to the middle picture. This doghouse right here, Maggie's body's found just a couple of feet away. Right about here is where her body is, pointing in the direction of Paul. Paul is literally laying across the pavement. And then, of course, when you go all the way up to the house, this is the front of the house. Creighton, I believe these are the steps where Gloria Satterfield died. That's
correct.
Yeah. And what's interesting is this bike right here, and I threw it in there because I thought it was kind of eerie. That's Maggie's bike. And this has been over a year later. Maggie Murdaugh's bike is still in the front yard. But that's me standing in the doorway of the room where Paul was murdered. And if you look past me, you can't zoom in on it, but that glass is still blown out. But they had stripped this room down since then. Let me go back one. So these are just some fun pictures. I did a witness in the trial, and that is a picture of me demonstrating in that doorway. The defense's theory of the case was that there had to be two shooters, because the first shooter would have killed Paul with a shotgun. And if you look right here where I'm standing, Paul would have been about 5 feet back. He would have been shot. It wouldn't have been a fatal wound across the chest. He would have stumbled out. And then the defense's theory is that someone walks past him in that doorway, turns around to shoot him from the back of the head, point blank range. And of course, and then by doing that, the defense's theory is that Paul's brains and blood and bone and all that matter goes back up into his the shooter's face, incapacitating him, which means there had to be a second shooter. Of course, when I was let me back up, went too far again. I was demonstrating in the doorway right by the witness box that was not plausible, and I just did the demonstration of that, and that was just one of the scenes there. And there's a picture in the message in the Q&A. Someone mentions Don Zelenka, one of your Rotarians. Was an anonymous attendee, but well, I'm sorry. There was an anonymous attendee says they attended law school with Don Zelenka. And Don is actually this guy right here with his face, hand covering his face, is Creighton's boss. And that is Don Zelenka, one of your Rotarians went to law school with, and that's me. We're sitting in the jury box during a break. And of course, the guy waving by to us is the former Attorney General of South Carolina, Charlie Condon, and then John Metters, one of our other prosecutors. And I'll get to that in a second. And we already showed you these pictures of the crime scene. Creighton, I'll just real quick. This is actually the picture in the upper left corner. These are the ones where these were more about me, but that's Nancy Grace. This is after the jury has gotten the case and they are deliberating. And so Nancy Grace came up while we were waiting on the jury's deliberation. And you can see Creighton in the back room right there. And then in the bottom right corner, that's our prosecution team. And for those of you who watch the trial, you'll recognize a lot of these faces. Our paralegals and our attorneys, our investigators. There's Creighton right there. There's Don Zelenka. And of course, we were waiting for the verdict to come out. I love this picture, Creighton, of you. And I remember when that happened. It was right before John Metters, the gentleman that Creighton is hugging, was about to do the cross-examination of Buster Murdaugh. And of course, that was a very difficult thing to do because Buster is obviously a very sympathetic witness. And I thought it was kind of sweet, if I can say Creighton was sweet, that he went over and gave John a hug literally a few minutes before John went up there to do the direct to Buster, or the cross of Buster. Creighton, I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, we just had such a wonderful team, and I'm privileged to lead them, and we really believe in state grand jury and the team that we have. We look for people that believe in success for one is success for all. And we just, we're still a great team. Everybody's still just together. And it's amazing after 6 weeks of living dorm life that we are still such a tight team, but that's important. I mean, we're huggers. We know about each other's families, and those personal connections, that makes it easy to do a project like this, because you're all pulling for one another and everybody's got your back. And so that was just a special moment. John's a wonderful guy, and he was just as supportive of me when I was going through tough parts of the trial as I was right there. But I love that picture too, General. I'm glad you put it in there.
I did. I thought it was nice. And it was so funny. Nancy Grace at one point during the trial, and I didn't watch a lot of the coverage, but someone said that she said Creighton Waters looked gaunt and pale. So I always made fun of Creighton because we had to feed him Kind bars and liquid IV.
Well, that was the day she wrote that apparently the day before the closing, and obviously we'd been 6 weeks in at that point. I think I was on 2 hours sleep, and had been in front of a jury for 6 weeks. And that's one thing about being the first chair is that even if you're not doing the witness, every decision comes to you. You're constantly having to manage everything, and it's a lot. It's a lot. So I lost about 10 pounds, but I was still going strong at the end there, and we got through it.
And by the way, I want to give a shout out. Judge Cliff Newman is just a prince of a guy. Everyone, I think on the defense prosecution, I thought he couldn't have been more fair. Just a little point of note for people watching this: 3 weeks before this trial began, his son had a cardiac event. His son was 40 years old and died from cardiac arrest. His son's name was Brian. Brian was a friend of mine in Creighton's. We knew him. He was an attorney. He had been working in Atlanta, but had been a practicing attorney in Columbia, South Carolina. And literally 3 weeks before the trial began, his son passed away tragically, and it was so sad. But the judge was there for 6 weeks, and just the juxtaposition between him presiding over a trial of a man charged with murdering his son while Judge Newman is trying to deal with the grief for losing his son. I just thought that was always a very powerful juxtaposition.
He's an extraordinary man. Very quickly, General, and there's one thing I knew about him though, is that Judge Newman, was going to persevere, and just an extraordinary man to have such a difficult loss and to continue on, and we all saw the wonderful job he did.
And this is literally after the verdict comes in and we've all collected ourselves. We walk out in front of the courthouse, and you can see me standing there, and I put in the subset Creighton standing literally over my right shoulder. But there's our whole prosecution team, and you can look at the scrum of media. I am told that there was going to be a live interview with the First Lady, Jill Biden, and that got bumped because of our press conference. That wasn't planned. That's what I learned after the fact. But it was covered on every major network live, and that's what it looked like from our vantage point. And I always thought that was kind of a cool picture. Literally within 30 minutes of the verdict, that's what we were dealing with. I put this in there because these are some funny pictures. Somebody was making fun of me on Twitter and pulling my eyes down. This guy's all of us. I always thought that was funny. Here's the bailiffs, the deputies from the court. We all got to be friends with these people. This is Jess. She was the lady that greeted us every day with Otis Spunkmeyer cookies at the Hampton Inn and Suites. And so we just all got to be on a first name basis. And of course, there's our friend John Metters, literally trying to stay awake during the trial. All right, this is the last slide, and I'll show this to you. When I got home after being gone for nearly 6 weeks, and it was difficult for my family. My wife had been battling breast cancer, just finished her last chemo. So she had gone through a really tough year, but let me do this. And I get home that night, and my daughter had baked me a chocolate cake and decorated it with all these pictures she got online. And that's my chocolate cake, and ice cream's my favorite. And then if you look right here, that's our German Shepherd, Lucy. And that cat right there, while I was in trial, my daughter fell in love with a cat. She got the shadow of veterinarian one day, and they brought in a kitten whose leg had been mangled, and they had to amputate the cat's leg. So she was there job shadowing that day, fell in love with the cat, then brings my wife over to the animal hospital. My wife sees the cat and it's like, look, you're broken, I'm broken, so we need to have a cat. My wife's allergic to cats, but somehow my daughter convinced her. So I came home to, I am now the adopted parent of a 3-legged cat named Danger. And that's his older sister, Lucy, the German Shepherd. And they really have taken to each other.
Well, that's what happens when you leave for 5 weeks. You were there 5 weeks, but that's what happens, General. But yeah, I mean, I want to point out that it was the families and the friends that were the unsung heroes of all of this. Obviously my family, I was gone. I came home twice in the entire 6 weeks for 2 of the weekends, and had, obviously, but my family was so supportive. Friends, people you talk to every day that encouraged you. And those are the folks who aren't in the spotlight, but really are so crucial to us surviving an ordeal like that.
Okay, so
is this a good time to go to questions?
Yeah, and by the way, I want to apologize. This PowerPoint presentation went into a lot of detail. There were a lot of names, a lot of numbers, and it's designed for probably a 3-hour presentation. Creighton and I were literally skipping a rock across the surface. Didn't want to bore y'all with all the mundane details, but it was a 6-week-long trial involving a 1.5-year investigation, and we're trying to sum it up in under an hour. But yes, Heidi, we're or Karen, whoever wants to take it from here. I see there's some questions and comments that we're happy to address.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go to some of these things, some of the questions, and people feel free to write some in, and we will try to get as many as possible and try to get us out of here pretty soon. The first question I'm going to take is from Alan Lee, and he wants to thank both of you for your time and ask, what are your views on media adding their vantage points, Netflix, etc. There has been a lot of extraneous coverage, documentaries, things like that. What are your opinions about that?
Well, first, I'll start and let Creighton Summit do the closing on that question. But the first thing I would say is that you could not make this story up in Hollywood. Like, honestly, if this was a mini series and someone wrote this, I'd quit watching it because it's just unbelievable. But everything, that every twist, every turn, every wrinkle in it's all real. It all happened. And like I said, it's better than anything Hollywood could ever come up with. Being that as it is, Hollywood can't help itself. It has to sensationalize everything. And so, and I don't want to, I think the people doing the documentaries are trying to get it right. They're trying to tell a story. But I think the thing for us is that the documentaries kind of are throwing very broad nets, and they're trying to incorporate all kinds of stories, and they're trying to get us to go down these rabbit holes with them because it helps tell a much bigger picture. And it can be very difficult sometimes when you're talking to people in the media who want to jump 3 steps ahead of you and make assumptions and inferences about what they think happened and present it as if it's fact. And you can't let them do that. You can't let them walk you down there. Creighton, I'll let you comment on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes a sensational case gets even more sensationalized. But the other thing about this is that, and we've pursued after the trial, of course, we didn't do any media interviews or anything like that prior. After the trial, we've obviously spoke to groups like this and things like that, just to make sure that there's, an accurate perception. But as we looked at the trial, this is just the reality we live in. People asked about a change of venue or sequestering the jury, and I just don't believe it's possible anymore. You can't put the jury in jail for 6 weeks, and you can't deny them their cell phones and all contact they have with the world. So, and then change in venue. What are we going to go to another county in South Carolina? Are people going to be less likely to know about this case? I've always said we could try to pick a jury in Ohio or Texas, and probably almost as many people have an idea about this case as in South Carolina. So ultimately, in this day and age, we just have to understand this is the environment we live in, and we have to impress upon jurors and rely upon jurors. And in the state grand jury, I get to interact with jurors, and I believe they do this and they can do this, for them to put all that aside and rely on the evidence that's in the courtroom. And I really felt, as we talked to people in the community prior to this trial, that people in the community in Colleton that deserves to have the right to pass on this, they deserve to have the right to do that, and that they were going to put all that aside. They just wanted the truth.
And let's go real quick, because the questions are coming in, and I want to hit them really fast. So go ahead, Karen. I'll let you.
Sure. Somebody writes, an anonymous attendee, surely there was quiet supposition or whispers from insiders at the local cocktail parties about Alec long before he was let go at the firm. Was the firm turning a blind eye because of his family's history and to mitigate the damage to the firm?
I do not believe they were turning a blind eye. I believe they were victims. Obviously, some of them would probably tell you today that they should have known all along that Alec was doing this. But I mean, that they were a victim as well, but they would probably feel, I don't want to say they felt stupid, but I mean, obviously he was stealing a lot of money from a lot of smart lawyers. Creighton, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, and obviously those cases remain pending on the financial side and are allegations at this point. And we always say that we have to point out that allegations, people are presumed innocent until proven guilty at trial. Obviously, a lot of this information came out at trial. But the reality is the word I said before, and that's trust. Our legal profession in South Carolina really depends on trust, and no matter how adversarial you are. And so you just have to remember to look things in context, that there was trust. There have been stories about the Murdaughs for years, but trust is an easy thing to abuse when you're in a position of power.
A lot of people didn't believe he'd be convicted because of there were cocktail party conversations and people did talk about the Murdaugh family, but people didn't actually believe that he could be convicted in that community.
Was that because he was so trusted, or was it because they thought he's untouchable?
I think there was both. I think there were people in that community that thought he hung the moon. I mean, that they gave a lot of money, did a lot of charity, they supported a lot of programs. He coached Little League. I mean, he was a pillar of the community, and that family name had been around for 100 years. But then there were people who had been not victims, but they were victims. They didn't know they were victims, but there were people who, the Murdaughs played rough and tumble. And there were stories going back decades, about the previous generations of Murdaugh. I'm not saying they're true, but there have been rumors for decades about the family. Whether they were true or not, I'll let you be the judge of that. Let's go to another question.
It was a carrot and stick type of thing. Yeah. It was a carrot and stick type of thing. Sorry,
okay.
Go ahead.
Michelle Barrier would like to know why you didn't seek the death penalty. It's a great question.
Creighton, I'll let you start. I'll finish that one.
Yeah. So the death penalty, and I've done a lot of death penalty work and did a death penalty case with Mr. Randolph, Alec's father. I'd never met Alec and never met him till I cross-examined him. But the death penalty brings us on a whole new set of issues. I mentioned before about believing that we could select a fair jury in Colleton County. But if you do the death penalty, you have to take a 6-week trial and double it. And not only that, those jurors have to be death qualified. So you could have a juror that could be fair and might even be a good juror for the prosecution, but unless they can consider both sentences, both life and death, they can't serve. So if they say, if you prove to me he did it, I'm automatically going to give him death, they're going to be disqualified. If they say, I don't, if you prove to me he did it, that's fine, I don't believe in the death penalty, which a lot of people don't, then they're automatically disqualified. So we knew it was going to be a tall order in this environment to get a fair jury. We believed we could. But that was going to be one set of a lot of issues that the death penalty brings. Life without parole is a good sentence for Alec. He's a narcissist, allegedly, and I think that's going to be difficult. But Alan, General, excuse me, please pick it up from there if you would.
And I'm going to be delicate when I talk about this, but the court, a lot of things are considered when the death penalty, like what do the victims want? When you're seeking the death penalty, do you have the full support of the victims? And in this particular case, you're dealing. Buster, and it's not that I'm sympathetic to Buster as a person. I'm just, the reality is his mother was brutally murdered. His brother was brutally murdered. His father's looking to go away for life, either death, if we got the death penalty, or for life. So his whole family's gone, and he's obviously believing his father's innocence. And then, of course, in order to keep family cohesion, they're rallying around him. And so if you walked into the courtroom, the Murdaugh family would have been sitting on the other side of the aisle, and we didn't fault them for that. Our victims advocate was serving them throughout the entire time. And they were potential witnesses for the state. So obviously asking for death when the victims are obviously struggling, they're supporting the other side. So it was something that I didn't want to put the state through that. It was ultimately my decision. Creighton recommended it, but it was a decision I agreed with, and we sought life without parole because under these, and by the way, it's been more than 12 years or 11 years since someone in South Carolina has been executed. And, he'd probably be in prison, even if he'd been convicted and sentenced to death, it'd be 30 years before that sentence would be carried out. And so I thought life without parole was more appropriate in light of all the facts that Creighton and I just mentioned.
And very quickly, having done a lot of death penalty work, and South Carolina is very much a law and order state, but I'm familiar with Texas as well. And, just there's a lot of practical and very practical reasons why the death penalty would make this case far more difficult, and was already going to be difficult.
And as I just want to comment, as you said about the judge, and I had no idea about his son. That's unbelievable. He was so eloquent when he handed down those sentences. And I think he said something about, I hope you sit in jail and think about this for the rest of your life. I mean, maybe that's better than the death penalty. So, okay, moving along. I think we had a question about Buster. Speaking of Buster, who is Alec Murdaugh's other son. I don't see the question anymore. So here's one from Karen White. Do you believe Alec's behavior reflected a generational pattern of his father and grandfather that got out of hand?
Creighton, you want that one?
Sure. I knew Mr. Randolph. I mean, obviously, there had been stories for years. There had been stories alive for Buster. I want to be clear. I don't know if any of those things were true. They were long before my time. I do know that we had evidence that Alec idolized Buster. And I do know that Alec had grown up, like I said before, and we presented evidence of this, of just occupying a unique position of preeminence in a community. Like, it's really kind of hard to explain and understand, but that circuit really kind of had belonged to that family, and I think that we presented evidence that certainly was part of Alec's psyche, and we also presented evidence that family legacy, trying to live up to it and protect it, was more important to Alec than anything. And as I said before, that gathering storm was threatening to undermine that. But again, I'm not gonna, Mr. Randolph was a legend when I was a young prosecutor, and I worked a case with him. And I never had a bad experience with him.
Okay, we're going to take. Do you have time for one more question, or
I got 5 minutes?
Okay, all right. And I know Creighton needs to get to band practice, but Amy Kilgore would like to know, why did Alec start all of this years ago? Did he just like to push the envelope? Was it the thrill of doing small things, and it snowballed to all of this?
Well, I mean, there are a number of theories. I believe, this is my theory. I believe Alec was a narcissist. I think he was an egomaniac. I believe this is a guy who had led a entitled life, and I don't think people wake up one day and say, I want to brutally murder my family. I think it's years in the making. Now, another component to my theory is that he's been abusing large, copious amounts of opioids for years, and that could have had a psychosomatic effect on his brain. But at the end of the day, this is a man who loved himself more than anything else. And the idea of losing his station in society was an anathema to him. It's something that he could not tolerate. And murdering his wife and son was a price that he was willing to pay to preserve his way of life. So I boil it down to, he was a megalomaniac. He was a narcissist. And his entire identity was built on this perception of the Murdaugh family dynasty. And if that came crumbling down, then he would cease to exist. And he was willing to do anything he could. So I think it was an accumulation of years and years of getting away with small things, leading to worse things, leading to really, really bad things. And he just felt really entitled to his way of life. That's my personal view.
Wow.
Yeah, he never had accountability. And again, he had such an insatiable life or need for money, and was living a life well beyond his means. And that started a cycle in the early 2000s, about 2009, 2010, where he had to start stealing millions in order to live the lifestyle he was living, on top of making millions. And eventually that was going to crumble. And was all happening on June the 7th.
Okay, gentlemen, I think that is a great stopping. Oh, go ahead.
Well, real quick, we can do this real fast. There's a question from Dr. Kelvin Moulton. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Where are the guns? What happened to the shirt Alex wore in the video by the tree? Another question is, how do you see pending federal indictments and state charges interacting? Will federal charges enable Alex to serve time in federal facility? I'll start with that one because it's quick. No, he's going to be serving life without parole in the state court. Obviously, they would love to get those charges thrown, those convictions thrown out, so that he could serve on federal time. But we've also got 99 other charges behind it, and Creighton and I are going to strike him out, life without parole either way. So
ain't going away.
Yeah, he's not. We're not letting him go to Club Fed. I think he was disbarred. Was it in the last fall? That was another question. At what point did the state bar take action? I think the Supreme Court disbarred him in the fall, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly, but it was after maybe round 3 of the indictments that we had. Constantly as we identified more theft, and so they actually just preemptively just disbarred him.
And I'm going quickly, y'all, because I limited time. Where are the guns and what happened to the shirt that he wore in the video by the tree? Obviously, Creighton I don't know if our theories are the same, Creighton, but I believe that obviously, if you for those of you who followed the trial, I believe that the night that he murdered his wife and son, he was down there. I believe that he had I think he murdered them around 8:49. He goes back to the house. His phone starts moving around at 9:02. So that's what, 13 minutes. So he has 13 minutes to rinse off whatever is on him down there at the kennels, take his clothes off, and grab the rifle and the shotgun used. Obviously, they found trace amounts of Maggie's blood in the car. Plausibly, that could have been from that. And then he takes them up to the house, probably wraps the guns in a big, like, tarp-like blue raincoat. They found GSR gunshot residue inside one of those raincoats at his mother's house. He probably stashed the guns off property, probably at his mother's place where he went that night, in order to discard of them later. He actually went back there a week later, and there was testimony to that at the trial. And he showed up at 6:30 in the morning, and the lady watching the caretaker watched him drive off on a gator and came back 15 minutes later. So did he bury the guns? Did he throw them in a river? We'll never know. But he had time to get rid of his clothes and put on something fresh and clean. Creighton, I don't know if you want to add to that before we stop.
Yeah, we always talk about taking a supposed weakness and making it a strength. We didn't have the guns, and finding guns in a wet county like Hampton is like finding a needle in a stack of needles, particularly someone who knows it as well as Alec. But what we did have were shell casings, weathered shell casings right outside the house that we had testimony had been fired by Paul just a few weeks or a month or two prior to the murders, also across the way at the shooting range, and they were a direct match 4 casings that surrounded Maggie's body, and Alec couldn't account for that particular weapon. So we still were able to show not only was a family weapon responsible for Maggie's murder, but that it was missing and Alec couldn't account for it. And so there's so much. This is a 6-week trial. It's hard to go over it all in 45 minutes. The closing argument, mine was 4 hours. It's a lot to get through. But we felt like, we don't have the gun, but we know which gun it was, and we were able to prove that to the jury.
And to sum it up, if the murderer wasn't Alec, and I know the burden's on the state, I'm not burden shifting, but this is what you have to suspend your belief. If it's a bunch of marauders there to punish the Murdaugh family for getting away with the boat case and for getting away with all this stuff, as Alec tried to pitch to the cops, you would have to have people who had an intimate knowledge of the 1,700-acre farm, knew the difference between going to the house where people were living and going to the kennels where Maggie and Paul were, had to know that Maggie and Paul and Alec would be there at that time when Maggie and Paul were not living there, and went to that property at that location on that property and used their own firearms against them. Instead of if you're going to someone's house to kill them, you're going to take your own gun. And that didn't happen. So there's just so many things you have to suspend your belief on if you thought it was someone else coming after him. And again, like Creighton said, the forensics proved beyond any doubt, or beyond a reasonable doubt, that the rifle that was used to kill Maggie was a family gun, because the shell casings they found around her body had the same fingerprints on them from the the chamber, from being chambered as the gun that was shot up by the house. So we were able to
cycle for the same weapon.
The cycle by that. Thank you. They were cycled. We didn't have a weapon to compare the boring to the barreling, but we could compare the shell casings. And so that's how we were able to lock it down as a family-owned gun. I want to say thank y'all for allowing Creighton. I know we went really fast and we hit you in the face with the fire hose, and it's hard to dumb this down or get it simple enough to get it in a Rotary speech, but it was a very, very complicated case that involved every type of forensics you can imagine, a lot of circumstantial evidence, but it all fit together and it painted the story of what happened that night. And we're going to continue to pursue all of those financial charges in due time.
Thank you so much, General, and Mr. Waters, for joining us. Thank you for getting to the truth, because that is important to a Rotarian. I think it should be important to all of us. You got to the truth, you narrowed it down, you convinced the jury. And as I say, I think America is so proud of you guys and think of you as heroes because you did it. And you went after the bad guys and you got them. And I really, really appreciate that on behalf of everyone watching. Now I'm going to turn it over to our present president, Chuck Meyer, who's going to take us home.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Y'all
y'all.
mind if we hang up?
I just want to thank you, General, and thank you, Chief, for your presentation. As a lawyer, as is Heidi, I'd just like to add a personal note that I really appreciate you protecting our profession and weeding out a very bad apple from our profession. So thank you for that as well.
Thank you.
Thank y'all for having us. We enjoyed it very much.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a son of Texas, it's always great to be with people from my home state. God bless.
Thank you again. All right, we are now in a position to conclude this evening's presentation. I'd like to thank our crack team of producers, Karen Hayes Chapman, Bobby Chapman, and Kent Hutchinson, without whom we wouldn't have been able to do that. I'd also like to thank Heidi for her role in this presentation. Bobby, if you could put up the final slide. I'd also like to thank all of you for joining the Lone Star Rotary Club of Texas. You can find us on the web. We have our Facebook page. We are going to be we have meetings every first and third Thursday at 6 p.m. And our next meeting is going to be our speaker will be a retention specialist for retaining nurses at Texas Children's Hospital, the nation's largest children's hospital, I believe. And you're all willing to, more than welcome to attend that meeting, which will be June 15th as our guest. And without further delay, thank you for your patience. And we really appreciate you attending tonight. Does anyone from the team have any further issues, or shall we declare this webinar finished?
I think we're done, Chuck. Thank you.
We're done.
All right. All right. Well, thank you all and have a good evening.